Hello, today I am making another wooden sign. This one's a little more complex. It is me and my husband's wedding song lyrics, and it's going to go in our bedroom. He has no idea I'm making it, so it'll be a good little surprise. There's my littlest monkey. Hi! So right now I am just cutting the stencil out, again out of the Cricut stencil material. That's what I like to use the best. It's the easiest to work with. So as soon as it's done cutting, we'll move on to the next step. All right, so the cut just finished. You can kind of see the cut marks there. It was actually one of the longest cuts I've done so far. And now I am ready to weed the stencil out. So another thing I wanted to show you, when peeling this one off, if you do it from the top, it will start to peel a little bit and cause some air bubbles. So I like to lie my mat face down and peel my mat up a little bit so that it doesn't cause all that bubbling in the stencil. And then you can see the stencil is still perfect. There is no peeling of it, no bubbling. Now that I have my stencil ready to be weeded, I'm actually going to trim it up a little bit because I do have a lot of extra on here that I could save for another project later on. So I'm just going to trim this. And that's a really good piece that I can save and use for another project. So now I am ready to weed this up, and I have my tools ready. I actually think what I'm going to do to make this a little bit easier is there are 4 lines of words. So I'm going to cut them separately, and I may even make a cut down the center if I can between some of the words, just to make it easier when placing onto the board. If I can keep my stencil intact, I will, but because this one has so many words, they will fold in on each other. This stencil material is great, but it's not very stiff, so it is hard to lay when it's a huge piece. So I did cut them up. I have them cut ready to weed now, and I'm going to try to keep them in order here. The one good thing about doing this with this stencil material, though, is that there are the lines, so it will be very easy for me to match them back up when the time comes onto the wood. Okay, so I'm ready to weed it now. With this stencil, I'm going to weed out the letters I want. So, to make my stencil, we weed all the letters out. This is a little bit backwards from when you're weeding normally. You would leave your letters if you were doing a vinyl project and weed out the negative. So right now we want to keep the negative and weed out the letters. Okay, so I've weeded all of my pieces. You can see here they're weeded out. Now what I need to do is line them up and hold them down first so that I can stick them into the right place. And to do that, I'm going to use some painter's tape to hold them where I want them so that I can line it up properly. Okay, so now I have them roughly lined up just so that I can be able to decide where on my wood I want them to line up evenly, and then I'm going to just hold them in place there with a little more painter's tape just so that I can feel like they're going to be straight and even. So it looks about good here. So I'm just going to tack down my corners until I'm ready to put all the pieces down. So I'm not sure if you can overly see this because it is pretty dark, but I am going to stick the last piece down now. I have all the other pieces on. I'm going to peel it off of the backing. And if there's like a piece that's not lifting, I just use my nail to help lift it up. I'm going to do my best to line it up on here, right in line with the other pieces. And now I need to fill in my middles. So, oh yeah, you can see that. So this top piece doesn't have the middles put in yet, and I've already done these ones. You can see here the middles are in. So I'm just going to add the middles here. And there are little lines to help line them up, but I kind of like when they're not perfect. And I got the last piece here. And now all of my centers are on there. There's a better way to see with the light. So now that my words are all on here, I need to go through and scrape them down so that they're really stuck so that the paint won't get up under them. So I'm going to take, I have two sizes. I have the large and the small scrapers. So I'm going to take the large one first and go over the words. You can see that as I, where is that good light? Okay, as I scrape, there we go. As I scrape, you can kind of see the coloring here. And as I scrape, you can see it gets darker in there, and that's how you know that you have scraped it down good. As the color changes there, you can see this looks like it's still kind of a little bit more white, and here it's more the color of the background. So I'm going to go through and just scrape all of these on. And you can see it's getting darker, so I'm going to lie it down and do it just so I can use a little muscle, because you do want to get it really stuck down. And watch as you're scraping too that you don't lift up any of the edges or paint will get into those edges. Now I do have some knots in my wood, so I am going to try and go into that area just a little bit harder with the smaller one so that I can make sure those edges all do get down. Another thing I like to do when you have the little middle pieces and you don't want to lift them up, I like to take the backing of the stencil and put it back over top of my stencil and then just scrape over that. And that helps to not lift any of those little edges up. All right, so there we have it. And it's all stuck down now and ready to be painted. There we go. You can see the words there. Our wedding song is "To Be With You" by Mr. Big. So that's what those lyrics are. So to get started, we're going to use a Mod Podge and Mod Podge within our letters. And then we're going to go, after that dries, and do our paint. I'm going to use a white chalk paint that I have left over from a few different projects that I've done. So to get started, everything is nice and stuck on. It's good and clean. You can go over and just see some of your edges. If you see any little bubbles, just push them down to make sure that no paint's going to bleed under there. The Mod Podge is also going to help with that. That's why we do use it. I like to use a sponge brush. It's up to you if you want to use a sponge brush or a paintbrush. And then you go over and just Mod Podge over your words. Make sure that when you're Mod Podging, you don't get any of the Mod Podge on your actual project. So we're just going to Mod Podge over our words. When we do that, we want to make sure that we don't get any paint Mod Podge onto the edge. You want to keep it inside of your lines so that you don't get a nice shiny blotch on your work when it dries. So be very careful at the edges. So I'm just continuing with the Mod Podge. I do have some seams, so I do want to be very careful in all my seams that I don't get paint or Mod Podge in there so that it doesn't go underneath the seam if it's not a perfect seam. Okay, you can see that now the Mod Podge is on and we're just going to let it dry. It takes about 15-20 minutes, maybe even less, depending on how thick it is. I put this one on a little bit thicker because of the knots in the wood. So it might take a little bit longer to dry, and then once that's dry, then we're going to go in and paint it. Okay, so the Mod Podge is dry, and now we're ready to start our painting. When we paint, we're going to quickly paint, and then we are going to peel the stencil off while the paint is still wet. So do one coat, and then see if you need to do a second coat or not, and if you do, we'll do it quickly, and then you're going to pull the stencil up. What happens if you wait until the stencil is dry is that the paint lifts off with it, so you want to do it while it's wet still. So my white chalk paint. Okay, now that we have painted, our paint is still very much wet and we want to get our stencil off right away. I'm going to start at the last stencil I put on because it's on top of the other stencils. So what you're going to do is you're just going to pick your stencil while it's wet and you're going to very slowly peel it up so that you don't get a ton of bleeding on it. And the middle of your letters are going to stay in, and we'll weed those out after. You can see here how it's lifting up. Okay, then we're going to go through and pull up all of the rest of the pieces as well. You can see I got a little paint here, so I'm going to try and get that off too. Okay, so now I have pulled up all the things. You can see I have a couple little spots that I did miss, so I will have to just wash it up and then stain over it. But now I have to pull out all these middle pieces. So I'm going to take my weeding tool and I'm going to weed them back out. And this one is a little bit harder, so I do like to use my tweezers as well to pull the pieces up. Okay, so there's the sign after we have weeded all the middle pieces out. I do need to just fix that little markup with some of the stain. Just go back over it. There, as it dries, you'll be able to just wipe the little fingerprints off, and there might be like little white specks that come off, and then you're done. All right, so I went back to the sign and I actually took a baby wipe and was able to wipe off the little marks that were around. And now you can just see the nice kind of lines of and knots in the wood all around here. And that's the sign, the finished product. Thanks for watching this video, and feel free to watch any of the other videos on our channel and subscribe to us if you want to see more. Thanks.